anxiety is a symptom that is presenting because of internal dysregulation. And that could be a good internal stressor or a bad internal stressor, that anxious response to tell you something is different here. And that's why it's really good to be in tune with your body and intuitive. And if you're feeling different, explore that. And why is that happening? Why is that coming up? I also think like a conversation I'm having often is, are you anxious or are you stressed? Because they are two different things, and stress can lead to anxiety, but they're different. So when we talk through those pathways, people are like, whoa, you know?
Welcome to the Advanced Women's Health Podcast, where we empower women with the latest insights and advice on holistic health. From cutting-edge medical research to practical wellness tips, our mission is to help you thrive at every stage of life. Join us as we explore topics ranging from hormonal balance and reproductive health to nutrition and mental well-being. Whether you're seeking solutions for a specific health concern or simply want to enhance your overall wellness, you're in the right place. Let's embark on this journey to better health together. This is the Advanced Women's Health Podcast.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back. I am so excited to have Dr. Ali with us today from our Port Credit Clinic. We are going to be diving into how Dr. Ali got into naturopathic medicine as usual, but we're going to dive into anxiety in a really big way today. What is actually going on with anxiety versus what TikTok says is going on with anxiety and naturopathic approaches. But as we dive in, who are you? What are you up to? What got you into naturopathic medicine? Let's start there.
Hello, everyone. I'm so excited. I always say my journey to naturopathic medicine was really one I didn't expect, but I've learned to absolutely love it. I was a dancer my whole life. It's a huge part of what makes me me. And I knew from a really young age that I loved the human body. I wanted to be in healthcare of some sort. I just didn't really know what that looked like. And my mom was really in the conventional system. She's worked in the hospital my whole life. So for me, I was like, well, that seems like the road I'm going to go down. So I went to the University of Guelph. I did my undergrad in biosci. I minored in nutrition and nutraceutical sciences, which is funny because at that point I was like learning about supplements, but still had no idea that I was going to go the naturopathic route. And then graduated, wrote my MCAT, got accepted to a medical school abroad because I did an early acceptance. So I didn't even try for Canadian schools at that point. And I remember the day I got accepted, like my whole world crumbled, which you don't expect for someone that's been wanting that path forever. And I just knew like it wasn't the right fit. I felt like I would be living a very passionless career and like unfulfilled. And I'm someone like I'm rooted in passion. So I was like, okay, I'm going to defer. I don't know what that looks like. Everyone around me was like, you're having a pre-midlife crisis. What is happening? And at that time, I was doing research at Toronto Western Hospital. I was in neuroradiology doing pharma research for aneurysm coiling. And I was like, okay, maybe I'll be a farm rep, or actually, I'll be a researcher, or I was so confused. So I really didn't know.
Yeah.
So I had a friend that I danced with, and she was at CCNM in first year. And I was like, I panic called her. Give me all of the information on this program. Tell me what the 4 years looks like, but also what after would look like, because as an anxious person, I needed to know that. And
Yeah.
she was really honest with me, and I loved everything she was saying. The only thing I was like unsettled with is the entrepreneurship that comes with being an
Yeah.
ND, because I was really unfamiliar with that. But I was like, you know what? We're just going to roll with it. I applied in September, got accepted in November, and I started January of 2020. And
Oh, you were a Jan baby.
yeah, and it worked out perfectly because I was like, I'm gonna have to wait till September to start a
Yeah.
program. And then they said, no, no, oh my gosh, no, there's a January start. And I was like, oh my God, this is perfect. Let's just do it.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's been a love story ever since. I absolutely love what we do. And we're always growing and evolving, but it's nowhere that I thought I would be in the
Yeah.
best possible way. So that's a little bit about me.
So then what within that whole journey, what were some of the pieces that made you gravitate towards naturopathic medicine? Because I know you said you like, oh, I have a friend, and right, like I had that conversation, but where was your mind going? What did you want to provide? How did you want to help people? Like, what did that look like?
So for me, the biggest part was connection. Like I needed to know that when I was working with a patient in whatever capacity, that I was going to be able to foster a relationship with them. And I felt like the conventional space didn't offer me that. And I felt like I would be very muted, so to say, in appointments and very rigid.
Yeah.
And that didn't sit well with me. So that's a huge part of why I felt like being a naturopathic doctor, like having an hour and a half initial appointment, I'm like, I could talk for way longer than that. We're a go. Like I was so
Yeah.
pumped about things like that and getting to know patients on a personal level. And that's something that I really try to do in my office space is get to know you. Who is your family? What are their names? What do you guys do in your spare time? Because that's how you build that trust. So that's a huge part of like what naturopathic medicine offered that conventional medicine didn't really.
And then you mentioned something that everyone thinks they're going to get away with things, but not here. You said as an anxious person, and we're talking about anxiety today. So walk me through that journey of how anxiety has showed up in your life at different points in times and how that's become a part of your practice.
Yeah. So I was always an anxious kid. Always. I had separation anxiety. I had insomnia. A lot of my anxiety as a kid manifested in like OCD tendencies because I was so worried about the future that I felt like if I didn't wear the same PJs to bed or say the same prayer every night, then I wasn't going to
Yeah.
wake up the next day. And then as a competitive dancer that was just so busy, I had no time to be anxious essentially. So when I got older, my anxiety manifested more into high functioning performance anxiety, where on the outside, everybody's like, wow, she's just thriving and excelling and she's so fine. But on the inside, my body was on fire, just running on adrenaline every single day, which worked for me. Like, I won't lie, it didn't feel good, but I was like, hell's yeah, I'm performing well. So then when things changed, I felt like this was my rock bottom is I had so many changes in life, I couldn't cope with that. So I had moved out of my family home with my boyfriend at the time, now fiance. For the first time I'd moved out. And at the same time, school transitioned from in person to online during the
Right.
pandemic. And I wasn't able to see my family, who was like, they were my rock through anything that was challenging.
Well,
So at
like you still cook cookies in their oven. Like
exactly. I am
we've
there
had this combo.
all the time. No, I moved away. When I say I moved away, I'm 30 seconds away from my parents'
That's what
household.
I was gonna say. I was like, do I bring out the fact that
Still,
separation anxiety doesn't
still there.
always happen when you can spit in their windows?
Yes, exactly. No, but that's my way of controlling it still, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I couldn't cope and I was so overstimulated. I just woke
Yeah.
up, I would cry every day. I would go to school and I was wired by tired, that burnout, like pre-burnout mentality where I
Yeah.
didn't stop because if I stopped, I would have to think about things until
Yeah.
I ended up getting super sick and I was on my ass and I
Yeah.
was like I can't continue to exist like this. And my therapist at the time gave me honestly the best advice I could have ever gotten. She said, you know, when you're learning to drive and they're telling you to think 4 steps ahead, so look 4 cars ahead, rear view mirror, side view mirror, blind spot, that's how an anxious brain is always thinking. So the best thing that you could do is just think 1 step at a time, see what happens, and if it warrants concern, then take it back a notch. So I did
Yeah.
that, and it was so helpful, like such an
I'm like,
easy,
how's that working for you, Allie?
so helpful.
This is the joys of working with people all day, every day, right? Like being on calls, seeing them in action, seeing these things.
Totally.
And it's also a really good reminder, like as much as I razz my team, and I think everyone on the podcast has come to appreciate that I razz my team, but we all are going to have these like trigger points in new environments. And it's like, oh, well, I've mastered it here. I've mastered it in this relationship. This is great here. This environment is fine. And then it's like, okay, well, this is still a big unknown.
Totally.
So I'm going to be like 12 steps ahead and try and create a plan for every plan. And
Yeah.
I think that's where we get into the high functioning anxiety piece, right? I have always thought like that. And I have never felt like it was anxiety, right? Because you're in this space where for me it is productive. It is how I move forward. It is how we get things done. I'm similar, been in a situation the last few years where I don't even have time to think, and it's given me freedom because I'm like, F around and find out, right? Like, what's gonna
Exactly.
happen? But it's given me confidence and it's given me freedom. And so I bug you because we do this with patients all the time, right? You'll be like, okay, so this patient's coming in tomorrow, and like, if they did this, what do we do? If they do this,
Yep.
what do we do? So, like, there's a component of people sitting here that are listening, being like, oh, not anxious. You know what I mean? I'm just thinking ahead. Like, this is great. That could still be that nervous system activation that's causing other symptoms and more global things because it's so normalized in our society to think 4 steps ahead, to have a plan for every plan. Like, isn't that just what we're supposed to do?
Right?
So I think there's probably a number of people sitting here listening being like, no, that's normal.
Yeah, and when you call someone out on that and they have that internal thought process, there is an aha moment. And there is such a beautiful thing about high functioning anxiety because you are productive, but it's doing that within reason and control, that it's not like escalating a fight or flight response every single time you're doing something. So now I can say, like, I exist with anxiety for sure. It's always going to be there, but it doesn't control me. Like, I feel very much in control, and mind you, we're all human, like, there's gonna be triggers and things where shit
Absolutely.
happens, but
Yeah.
no longer am I saying, like, I'm so overwhelmed with anxiety that I can't function. Like, I've broken past that, which now I wanna help patients thrive beyond their anxiety, but still know that it does exist in them, but it's being able
Yeah.
to manage that moving forward. Yeah.
I often, when I'm talking to patients about this, I always say sometimes the physiology is not the problem, it's the story we create about the physiology. Right. And I have had very few, like, obviously, we've all been in situations in our lives, but I've never lost control of the story. And I always say, so when I was pregnant with my oldest, Benjamin, how I knew I was pregnant is because I was anxious. I would literally be sitting there, like, crying, be like, forgot to get peanut butter at the store, and when am I gonna get it? And like, and once, like, my husband is looking at me being like, are you okay? Like, I think we need to, like, be on a stick. I think we need to figure out what's going on because it was just this hormonally
Oh,
driven
you didn't
anxiety.
know at that time.
No, I lost control of the story,
Yeah.
right? It was like my brain just started to create so much attachment and so much of a story around my physiological feelings that I lost control of that. And it just was so disorienting for me. And then I continued to have anxiety probably until I was like 8 to 10 weeks, where I was just like, put your feet on the floor, woman. Like, what is happening? Because I could see it was almost like this out of body experience where my physiology was doing what it normally was, but because of the hormones, because of the changes in inflammation, because of all of those things, the stories that I was attaching and the emotions I was attaching was totally different than I normally would. And I realized in that moment, I was like, this is what it is. This is what patients are describing. This is what they're feeling. It's just I have the luxury of having been in it and out of it, or like out of it, then in it, then out of it in a very short period of time. So the contrast was so significant that I could see what was happening. But if you've always lived with that story about the feeling, right? If you've always lived with attaching emotion and reaction to a physiological event, then you don't know the difference,
Yeah.
right? And we'll get into the causes of anxiety, but during that period of time, it was like for me, it was hormones, it was blood sugar, it was immune system, it was how those things were changing. And so I think we talk about anxiety often like it is this solely mental emotional event, but so much of it is rooted in those changes.
Yeah, and that's a conversation that I'm having with patients all the time. Is anxiety is a symptom that is presenting because of internal dysregulation. And that could be a good internal stressor or a bad internal stressor. Like, it could be good or bad, but your body is mounting that anxious response to tell you something is different here. Pay attention to us. And that's why it's really good to be in tune with your body and intuitive. And if you're feeling different, explore that. And why is that happening? Why is that coming up? I also think, like, a conversation I'm having often is, are you anxious or are you stressed? Because they are two different things, and stress can lead to anxiety, but they're different. So when we talk through those pathways, people are like, whoa, you know?
Let's look through that right now because I think that's such a good distinction, right? Like, I can be stressed in a moment and have no anxiety whatsoever and let it pass. You know what I mean? And I don't think that is something that's talked about near enough. So I want you to dive in detail about what you mean by that because there's going to be a lot of people listening being like, excuse me? I don't think that's true. So like walk us through that.
Okay, so looking at anxiety, so this is a nervous system response. It's really rooted in worry, control, futuristic thoughts and rumination, but it's like an underlying nervous system response that's kind of like a dull constant. It's happening even without a trigger. And those symptoms could look like increased heart rate, sweating, panic, hyperventilation, or just the thoughts themselves. Whereas stress, and this could be an internal or external stressor. So, external is you sitting in your morning commute, you in a work meeting, me on a podcast, like something like that. Versus internal, which is like
Just
blood
being
sugar,
in Sarah's presence.
right? Start sweating immediately. But yeah, internal is blood sugar dysregulation, the immune system, infection, inflammation, nutrient status. So when we're stressed, your body has an immediate response, which is that fight, flight, fawn, freeze. We have our 4 F's there, which is like norepinephrine, epinephrine, so that adrenaline response acutely, which does things in and of itself. Like it's going to slow down digestion, it's going to increase blood pressure, it's going to increase heart rate. So it's that survival. Whereas you have more of the long term perception of stress where the brain communicates with the adrenal glands, the two little hats on our kidneys, releases cortisol, and the cortisol now is going to increase blood sugar, affect the immune system, cause brain fog, lack of clarity, changes in hormones. So we have the two ends of the stressor, but those stressors can lead you to feeling anxious again because the anxiety is the symptom of that internal dysregulation. Am I missing anything there? I'm like, that was a lot.
I think you nailed it. So and again, like just to paraphrase, anxiety is a state that can be induced
Yes.
by a stressor, right? Anxiety is a constellation of symptoms, but fundamentally it's an outcome. Whereas stress is an event that could take you to anxiety, it could take you to depression, it could take you to feeling nothing at all, right? And I think we often conflate anxiety with chronic stress. And we're like, well, if you're stressed out, it's going to give you anxiety. But what the research has shown is anxiety and depression are conditions of blood sugar dysregulation and inflammation and a little bit of nutrient deficiencies, right? So, very, very actionable things that can actually be very separate. I have patients all the time, and I'm so positive that you do too, that come in and they're like, my life is great. I'm so supported. I have done I do all of the contrast and you know what I mean? Like the cold plunging and the meditating. And I have quit my job or I work part time now. And like thinking that if they just strip away stressors, meaning external stressors in their life, the anxiety is going to just magically disappear. And it's a conversation I have all the time, whereas like anxiety is a state that has been created by multiple different events in your body. It is not just you driving in traffic. That might be the last drop in the bucket. That might be what's exacerbated it. But just because that's the thing that caused it doesn't mean that's the thing that's going to get you out of it. I always say a tub doesn't overflow, right? A sink doesn't overflow with the first drop of water. It's the last drop of water that gives us the outflow. And that outflow is the symptoms. So we always attribute podcast with Sarah, fight with my boss, whatever that looks like. And then that being the moment that you had anxiety, that you had a symptom, but we're forgetting everything that filled that bucket. And that's what we do at Advanced Women's Health. Like that's how we navigate is we say, what's filled the bucket? Let's figure out how to drain it. Let's figure out how to like fill it less fast and then go from there. And I think it's just such an important way to navigate it because for so many people, mental health struggles, they feel a victim to it. They feel like it's out of their control, like there's nothing they can do. And there's just so much power in being like, these things you can control, right?
Today's episode is brought to you by none other than Advanced Women's Health. If you are interested in diving in deeper to your health, if you are finally ready to feel like yourself, and you are finally over hearing everything's normal, everything's fine, and you want a deeper dive into your healthcare, then we are here to help you. We are currently helping patients in British Columbia and Ontario, Canada. But don't worry, if you're in another province, still reach out, get added to the wait list as we expand coast to coast. We cannot wait to work with you. Check out the show notes for more information on how to get started.
So then walk us through, as we have someone in our office, they're presenting, they want to work on their anxiety. Anxious people absolutely love walking into new situations without knowing what's going on. What does that journey look like? What do those appointments look like? What does treatment look like? And help us navigate that.
Yeah, so coming into that initial appointment, I'm always very gentle to talk about anything mental health. I'll let them start where they want to start in that journey. So maybe that isn't talking right away about their anxiety or their stressors or their previous traumas that have led them to have nervous system dysregulation, but we're going through, okay, what are some concerns that are coming up? I find, and I don't know if this is the same for you, but I find that a lot of anxious individuals are usually coming in with the co-concern of digestive issues. So we'll start there. So yeah, because their body, why, if you're running from a bear, why is your body going to digest anything, right? So we'll start with some of their other concerns and gradually transition into what does stress look like? What does your daily routine look like? That's a big one that I ask, because if that person is like waking up, hustling to get the kids' lunches ready, get them out the door, get to their 8 a.m. job, at work in high stress meetings all day, go to pick up the kids, come home, extracurriculars, like obviously you're very stimulated that day, you're go, go, go. That's going to lead to feeling some sort of stress. So we look at their routine, we look at the typical kind of health parameters for them in terms of sleep, what is diet, like what are those foundational things looking like? And then we jump into how their anxiety presents. I will say, very honestly, a lot of the patients that I see have the I'm fine mentality, even though they're so anxious. And they're like, again, like you said, the drop in the bucket, they're one drop away from burnout. So we're usually supporting not getting them there. We want that to not happen. So I love to do blood work. We're going to start off with blood work if they haven't already had it done. We're going to run some labs. However, there's no specific test that's going to say you have anxiety or you have any mental health concerns. So we're really looking at all of the underlying causes of physiological dysfunction, inflammation, nutrient status, which is like iron, B12, vitamin D, magnesium. We look at our immune function. Is there an infection going on? Is there something that's actively there that we have to fight against? Blood sugar and insulin regulation. So we love a good insulin glucose challenge test. Something really great that patients can use at home is a continuous glucose monitor as well to
Yeah.
track how food is actually going to be affecting them throughout the day and even overnight, how their blood sugar is spiking.
And in that situation, if you feel anxious at 10 a.m. and you think it's because you have a standing meeting at 11, you know what I mean? It could actually be because your blood sugar is dropping.
Yeah.
And we don't factor that into the conversation.
Yeah, we also test things like morning cortisol to see where are you starting your day off. So we're doing blood work so that I can really give patients data on why they might be feeling like they're feeling. Because
And control. This
yeah,
is, I always laugh. So many of our super high performers, they love the data because they're like, it's giving me back control.
yeah,
Situation.
we'll take over all of your control. Please give it to me. It's so funny. I always say though to patients, I'm like, I can take away internal stressors, but I can't take away your external stressors. So I can't take away the boss that you don't get along with. I can't take away
No.
your morning commute. Like I can't help you with those. But my goal is to make you more resilient to those stressors so that when your body sways away from homeostasis, I can get you back to it faster. So with treatment, like it's obviously going to vary from patient to patient. We're working on all of those parameters of health that I was saying before and seeing what comes up in blood work. But when I think about supplements that I use for anxious patients, I kind of have three camps. Now I'm using your word of camp. Three camps that my brain goes.
All these things that I don't even know I say.
Yeah.
And people rise me all the time. They're like, "Oh, I was watching your recording and there's something I say. I'll remember it." And everyone now, I won't actually say it because that's all you'll hear me say when you're listening to the podcast. But yeah, people bug me all the time.
Yeah. Yeah, there's some that just stick. So yeah, the three
Yeah.
camps of supplements I have, we have like our really heavy hitters, which is your nervine. So passion flower, valerian, ziziphus, chamomile, lavender, California poppy. Those ones are for patients that are really they have a deep rooted nervous system dysregulation, whether they notice it or not. There might be trauma there, but it's really affecting their day to day living. It might be interrupting with sleep or their functionality throughout the day. And I find that those just really work well. There's the camp of like resiliency and cortisol management, which is like the cordyline products. So Relora, Magnolia, L-theanine, magnesium, ashwagandha. They're usually combo products. Like I'm not using things individually most of the time. And then there's like the fast actors. So those are chewables or liquids where it's going to be L-theanine, GABA, magnesium, inositol, glycine, taurine, some of those. So the act of chewing it or drinking it breaks someone's anxious focus in that moment. So that's supplement wise, but there are the more lifestyle factors that you have to take into consideration when a patient is ready. If they come in and I'm like, we're going to change this in your diet and you're going to add this movement in and you need to sleep this much, that's overwhelming for an anxious brain. So, my goal is to get them to a place of feeling more resilient supplementally and fixing the internal physiology, and then they make the external changes. So, that's kind of what my thought process looks like. And externally, that could be therapy, that could be yoga class, movement in general, that could be walking, it could be just adding in time for self care, so overlooked, but so important, or time to just relax. A lot of high functioning anxiety individuals don't know how to relax. Like they watch a movie while still typing on their computer and reading a text. Like it's like multitasking all the time. So that's kind of how my brain thinks through those appointments.
Yeah, and just to but it's so funny. I have had to teach myself to repeat so many times. So when we're talking about physiological factors, that's where again what Dr. Al is talking about is what do we need to do to personalize your diet to your blood sugar so that you don't have high highs and low lows because both of those cause anxiety. Do you need iron? Do you need B12? Do you need a vitamin D? Like what does that look like? What is the status of your inflammation? What is the status of your gut and your gut microbiome and your digestion? Because all of those are loops of dysfunction. All of those are places where they will make the anxiety worse, and the anxiety worse makes them worse. And so you just get stuck in this pattern and you feel like you can't get out. So we always across the business, like we're starting with that because that honestly you can turn someone around in 2 weeks. You could turn, I have patients that had really severe insulin resistance. And within 2 days, they went from having panic attacks 2 to 3 times a day to nothing just by figuring out how many grams of carbs can this person eat? How much protein does this person need? We see everything on TikTok, and I think part of the reason I love labs so much in this population is because it does give you control of some of those metrics. It does give you answers to some of those things. You see online that you should eat 6 meals a day, you should eat high protein, you should eat plant-based, there's so much information but so little of it is actually relevant to you and your body, which is why personalizing that makes such a difference. Then we layer on how do we change perception with herbs? That's it. I love herbs because I that's how I describe it to patients. You can look at the same situation 2% differently. And so, whereas previously you were already an 8 out of 10 kicked off, and that changes your brain to look for the worst case scenario. That changes your brain to go into this stress mode. either a flight mode, right? A fight mode where you want to throw punch someone, a people pleasing mode. You're always so close to not having a clear perception of reality that the herbs just help you to more clearly perceive what's actually happening, right? The blood sugar dysregulation. I use this example all the time, and people are probably bored of it, but repetition is the master teacher. If you have ever read an email before you went for lunch and you felt so angry and so kicked off, and then you're like, I'm going to just go for lunch, and you come back and you read it again, and you're like, is that the same email?
Yeah.
Your blood sugar was low going into that reading that. You were already stressed. So you put the emphasis on the wrong words. You read it in the wrong way. And then you came back with clarity. You came back with blood sugar regulated. You came back in a better space. And you can now read that email for the true intention. And so, wherever we're having these moments in our life, it's so important to recognize because it's so fixable. It's so, like, when you identify it, I think we laugh about the aha moments, but it's true. Like, we'll be talking to patients and they just burst out laughing. I'm like, oh my gosh, you're right. You know what I mean? Like, this is how I've been existing, this is how I've been living. And there's so much you can do about it, which I think people oftentimes overlook.
Yeah, and with that note of existing and living like that for so long, there is the resistance that an anxious patient will give you to not want to change because they have to lose control to do so. So it's working with where that patient's at and not stripping away their control in situations and helping them to see that you are very much in control of all of this. This is how we're going to help this. And they understand everything, that they won't resist as much. But at first, there is some level of resistance that we do get with an anxious person. And then they come back and they're like, oh my God, pooping every day is incredible. I don't feel anxious. And I'm like, yes, I knew that would happen. It's like little things like that.
Yeah, it's so true, right? And it's it is it's so funny how people navigate control, right? And I've had so many bad therapists navigating that space and talking about it. And I remember one time I had a coach and she said to me, do you struggle with giving up control, or is it your fear of being out of control? I was like, I'm out of control. You know what I mean? Like, it was just like such a trigger point.
Been
I was
her.
like,
Yeah,
I don't know who you think you're talking to, but I do not. But in that moment, just even my visceral response to like being out of control versus giving up control, I was like, oh, no, 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 sis.
yeah.
You do not know who you are speaking to now. But it's whenever you're having those reactions, responses. I like stay really curious around those things because it's such an important teacher on where the next learning comes from. And I think you're right, like so much of this shows up in our offices, and there's so much power in pointing those things out and having those conversations with people when they're ready, because it's like borderline funny when they get over like the trigger of it. Like the number of times I have patients who come in 2, 3 visits later, and they're like, "You remember when you said that? I thought about that for the last 3 months," and like I'm like still processing it. I'm like, "Oh, I'm sorry." They're like, "No, it's what I needed to hear." Right?
Definitely. Yeah. And we can see that too. Like as practitioners, you can see when you might need to handhold a little bit for a patient. Like if a patient's emailing in after appointments, having an anxious response like, oh, this supplement is causing this. Should I discontinue? Or I'm feeling this. Like that tells me that I need to A, explain what could potentially happen with supplementation or with changing your diet so that they don't feel like they have those moments of losing control, because it is scary to not know what comes next. Like the unknown is challenging for an anxious mind. So, yeah, we really get a good read of our patients in that initial appointment and ongoing with building that relationship with them so that each plan I give you, I know exactly how to make it just for you and not just this generic plan for any anxious person.
And I think it's such a good point, right? Because we talk about that a lot as a team. I always say I'm responsible to my patients, not for my patients. That's something I say a lot. Meaning I will give them everything I have, but I can't be there on their day to day. right? And one of the most valuable pieces of feedback I get is I need more information here, or I need this, right? And this is how I best function is if you give me none of the side effects except the critical ones, or all of the side effects that are
Yeah.
normal. You know what I mean? If it, because we have what we call informed consent, right? So we have this whole list of things we have to tell people. But I have patients, they're like, that does not work for me, right? You need to tell me the two or three things that are absolutely critical that I know, and not this like running list like the pharma commercials in America with like every possible side effect that could happen. But whenever people have those conversations, it's so powerful for me because it's so easy for someone to not speak their truth, to not think through that, to just like let it go and be like, okay, you know what? It's fine. Like, this just didn't work for me. But coming in and communicating your needs, always happy to support that. We work with such a diverse group of people, and I think everyone thinks their needs are unique. Like, I have patients that we just know from an admin standpoint, we need to book them for a 15 the week after their visits because they process not in the visit. They like, even though we have a lot of time, they process after. But then my schedule is whack. So it can take a long time to get in. And so then there's this feeling of panic on the other side. So we're like, okay, you know what? We're just gonna book your visit, and then we'll book another visit a week later so that you have time to think, you have time to process, and then we'll get you in and answer all those questions and make sure you take action. So there's no one right path. And that's the beautiful thing about our medicine is that we can customize it to the person we're working with.
Yeah, it is really great. Like, it does change a lot of lives, and I feel like, especially in the realm of mental health, there's just so much beauty in being listened to and chatting through the way that someone's brain thinks through something because of that time that we have. Patients just feel so heard, and they leave feeling so validated, and they're excited for their plan, and they're motivated to commit to that because they're hopeful that they'll notice that change. Yeah, it's so great. It makes me so happy.
Agreed. So then if there were two things, because one thing that can cause anxiety is lots of information. So if
Yeah.
there were two or three things that you would want someone who's listening to this, who's either knows they're suffering with anxiety, or thinks they might be struggling with it, what would you want them to take away from this?
I think one thing that's really important is that it's okay to not be okay, and it's okay to need help with any mental health condition. We're here to get your body to a place where it feels back to homeostasis a little bit more so that you can really make the changes on your own. So it's okay if you need an SSRI or an SNRI or some sort of pharma or supplements just to get you over that hump or that last drop in the bucket. And there's no shame and there's no stigma about that. But that's might be what you need because you're not going to be able to meditate or journal or therapize your anxiety away right away. You are going to need some time to be able to get to that spot. So that's definitely one thing that's really important. And then also really listening to yourself and knowing when it's time to slow down. I think that's something that everyone in a fast paced environment, the hustle and bustle of, especially the GTA where we are, like, it is such a busy life. It's okay to take time for you to slow down. If your body needs a rest day, that's not a negative thing. You're not failing anyone. You're actually going to be more beneficial and helpful to people in the future. So, those are a couple of things that I want everyone to know. And then I think this is more than two now, but investigating the internal, like looking further than just your brain and what you're thinking, what could be making you anxious? What is going on that is causing the anxiety to have an outward manifestation? And really exploring that with your practitioner and going deeper and trying to bring the body to a state of balance, really.
Yeah, it's so true. It's such a key thing. Like I always say, there are so many things in my job that just absolutely I sit here, processing because of how much we can help people. And I feel like anxiety is one area that is so impactful and so powerful because people have spent so much of their life thinking again, going back to the first person I talked about, they just need to slow down, that they're just not the type of person that can handle things, that they like, that it's them. And I think the physiology piece, to be able to hand someone, and going back to control, a piece of paper that's like, here are the key areas we need to work on, and then them to be able to take action on that and feel totally different in such a short period of time. It's such a wild privilege to be a part of that journey for people, and I just so wish more people knew that that was something that they had access to, which is why we do podcasts, why we do things like
Yes.
this. So
Yeah.
yeah, so thank you so much, Dr. Ali, for coming and chatting with us and sharing. It's such an important topic. We do now offer free anxiety assessments, right, to give you an overview, a sense of which direction we could go. We're not providing treatment on these assessments, but it will just give you this 15-minute high level understanding of how we can support you. Because for so many people who are feeling anxious and overwhelmed, getting started is overwhelming. And so we're really excited to be able to roll these things out now, to just give you the opportunity to get to know Ali, get to know the team, get to know whoever, and take that first step, because it is what catapults you into the life that you know you're capable of. So thank you so much, everyone, for listening. Thank you, Ali, for coming. And I'm sure we'll hear lots from you in the future as well. Have a good day, everyone. Bye.
Thank you so much for listening. I hope that you had as much fun as we did. And if you loved today's episode, share it with a friend and leave us a review. That is how we spread this message, and that is how we are going to revolutionize healthcare in Canada for women. Have a beautiful day and be well.